Hi, I'm Dev.
And I'm Cam.
And you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up.
Do you love listening to the Criminalish podcast? Want to hear more from Kim and Dev? Then consider becoming a subscriber for $2.99 a month. Subscribers will have exclusive access to minisodes, Dev and Cam's live reactions to crime shows and documentaries, as well as early access to any multi-part episodes and so much more. Click the link in the show description if you're interested in subscribing. See y'all in Cell Block C.
So today I will be telling Cam about the murder of Timothy Richard McLean, which is better known as the Greyhound Bus Murder. Have you heard about this case before, Cam?
The Greyhound Bus Murder sounds familiar, but I can't remember the details. You have told me that this is a rough one, so even though I have heard of the name, I don't think that I've ever listened to the case in detail.
Got you. Well, this case is pretty infamous and is especially infamous in Canada, which is actually where our story takes place today. And like Cam already said, this case is very twisted and very messed up. And this episode will definitely be really light as we will be establishing some very important background to all of our characters here. But there will be a part 2 to this episode that definitely gets into the more horrific aspects of this case. However, I do want to extend trigger warnings for self-harm and suicide as it relates to this episode, and I will execute separate trigger warnings for part 2. So before we dive into our first case outside of the US of A, what are you drinking tonight, friend?
Today I'm drinking some tea, and I actually put 2 different tea bags in here. One of them is a sencha green tea, and the other is like an immune and stress tea, because you told me this was going to be a rough episode. So I was like, let me go ahead and get something that's going to calm me down. So what you drinking, friend?
Very smart. I, on the other hand, did not take my own advice, and I am drinking a rather large iced coffee from a unidentified coffee shop.
That America may or may not run on.
That America may or may not run on. But they not sponsoring us, so I'm not telling you what coffee I'm drinking. Because, nothing's better for your anxiety than caffeine, right?
At least you know some of the stuff, so maybe you're better prepared. Not to say that doesn't make it easier to talk about it, but I am going into this completely blind.
Yeah, I will say there is one part of this case that every time I talk about moves me to tears, and I'm going to try my best to not cry on this podcast, but I will not promise that I will not do that.
Yeah. Listen, I've already done it, so your time is coming up.
My time has come.
But I also want to say thank you to Dev, because this really should have been my week to tell her story, but I'm in the process of moving, and so Dev, as a wonderful, wonderful friend that she is taking over this episode for me. And y'all will get to hear me tell a case to Dev in a few weeks after we've released part 2 of this one.
Yes, Cam is finally getting out of Boston, y'all. So happy for her.
Thank goodness.
So again, today we will be discussing the Greyhound Bus Murder of Timothy Richard McLean. So Timothy Richard McLean was born on October 3rd in 1985, and he grew up in a small farming community called Ely, which is about 30 miles from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which is the capital and largest city of the province of Manitoba in Canada. And it sits about 70 miles north of the US border. And Timothy came from a very loving and happy family. He had 2 wonderful parents and 6 siblings. Timothy was described as someone who was very active and could never sit still even if he tried. It seemed like he always needed to be doing something in order to keep himself busy and stimulated. He was a lover of sports and the great outdoors, and he was the type of person who never turned down the opportunity to experience an adventure. He was also described as very charismatic, and he had many friends, and people really flocked to the positive personality and energy that seemed to radiate off Timothy. So from a pretty young age, Timothy realized that the traditional route of going to college and getting a degree and then settling down in a job that you work for 40 years was not something that he wanted to do.
I heard that, Timothy.
Period. He wanted to find a job that he loved, something that he was passionate about, and that would continue to be fun and adventurous. And he found that job when he started working for the carnival. And not only was he working for a carnival, which allowed him to have a really fun atmosphere as his workplace, it was very creative and very unique, and it was a traveling carnival as well. So Timothy also got to travel and see new places in the world while he was working. And I'm sure you can imagine, as a super adventurous, fun person who could never sit still, this job was absolutely perfect for Timothy. And by all accounts, he absolutely loved it. And one of the things that Timothy would do is film all of his experiences while he was traveling with the carnival. And I definitely think that Timothy was inspired to post his experiences in traveling with the carnival and potentially even put them on YouTube. Timothy had told several people on multiple occasions that one day he was going to be famous. So Timothy was working at the circus between 2004 and 2008. And remember, YouTube officially launches in 2005. And as Timothy is recording these videos in 2008, YouTubers are just now starting to become very famous and very much a full-time occupation. The biggest channels on the platform at the time were things like Smosh, Lonely Girl 15, and Fred. And if you have no idea what any of those three things are, you're too young to be listening to this podcast. But the main point is that uploading on YouTube was just starting to become popular, and some of Timothy's videos are available for people to look at and view on YouTube, even to this day. His videos and the way he just kind of, I'm holding my camera and shaky cam and whatever and showing you guys what I'm doing. But it's very much vlog style. It's very much wholesome and endearing kind of thing. And personally, I think Timothy would have been a great YouTuber had he had the opportunity to grow and develop his envisioned channels. So while Timothy absolutely loved his job in the carnival, by 2008, he's 22 years old and decides that his time in the carnival has been extremely fun, but he's ready to take the next steps in his life and look for a different career path, as well as look to settle down and potentially start a family. So while his carnival was stopped in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is about 800 miles west of Ely, where Timothy's family is, Timothy decides that he's going to leave the carnival at this location and make a quick stop at home in Ely before traveling to British Columbia, Canada, with the hopes of starting a new life and settling down in British Columbia. And when Timothy told the rest of his coworkers that he would be leaving the carnival, they were really upset because they hated to see Timothy go. He was a phenomenal person to be around and to work with. So because of this, the carnival actually offered to pay for Timothy's plane ticket back to Winnipeg so he could go see his family before eventually going to British Columbia. And they kind of wanted to give this as a parting gift from the carnival family that Timothy had cultivated for himself.
Well, that was really nice.
Yeah, it was. However, Timothy refused the plane ticket, citing that he wanted to take the bus from Edmonton to Winnipeg, and that it would be a fun adventure for him, despite the fact that the trip was going to take over 24 hours to complete.
I know this is when we're getting to the Greyhound bus. Man, now I'm already thinking if he would have just taken that plane ticket, He must really love adventure because I've been on a Greyhound bus for a 10-hour trip, and that was 9 hours way too many.
No, I feel you. I have also taken not a Greyhound bus, but a similar bus experience for a 8-hour drive. And the first probably 3 hours I was fine, but hours 4 through 8, I was pretty much over it.
Yeah, and it's so tight. And what's crazy was when I took the trip, it was from North Carolina to Georgia, which is normally only a 6-hour drive. But because the bus has to make multiple stops and they're not going direct from your stop to your destination, it literally added on 4 hours. I was so done.
Exactly. That's why bus trips take so long, because even the one I took was from Atlanta to Orlando, which is normally a 5-hour drive, but it's an 8-hour drive when you have to make 3 stops along the way. But Timothy was excited about it. He wanted to, look out the window, look at the great beauty of Canada on the roads. So I think he definitely thought this was going to be a fun way to see a lot of Canada and interact with some people whom he had never met before, because he really enjoyed talking to strangers and learning about other people's lives. He was just such a positive person all the time. So Timothy purchases a ticket to catch the 1170 Greyhound bus from Edmonton to Winnipeg on the 30th of July. On that day, Timothy boards his 1170 Greyhound bus to begin his journey to Winnipeg. And by all accounts, Timothy is having a great time on his journey. He's relaxing, he's talking to other passengers, he's just taking in the experience of this very long trip. At around 6 p.m., Timothy's bus pulls into a bus stop in Erickson, Canada. The bus stops briefly before welcoming a new passenger who sits at the front of the bus. Approximately an hour later, the bus stops again to allow passengers to take a break from the very long journey they had been taking. At this point, the bus had been traveling for almost 18 hours. And after this break, everyone returns to the bus and sits in the seats they were originally sitting in prior to the stop. However, the new passenger, who originally sat in the front row of the bus, had walked down the aisle, looking every passenger in the eye, and passes several seats before finally coming over and sitting in the seat immediately next to Timothy. And Timothy greeted the person who sat next to him before putting his headphones on and going to sleep for the remainder of the bus ride. So I'm sure you're wondering, who is this person who skipped past several empty seats just to sit next to Timothy? And that man's name is Vincent Lee. So Vincent Lee was born on April 30th, 1968 in Dandong, China, which is located in the western border of North Korea and the northwest shore of the Eula River. Vincent grew up in a 2-parent household, and he also had 2 siblings. So growing up, it seemed like Vincent had a lot of issues from the very beginning of his life. Vincent was born 1 month premature and was described as a very sickly child. I could not find the specifics on exactly what people meant by sickly, but in my experience of knowing people who had babies premature, there tends to be some general immune system deficiencies as well as some developmental delays that can result in them being more sick than a full-term child. And there was further evidence to support these developmental delays in Vincent, including the fact that he was described as a very late bloomer who did not start walking or talking consistently until years after children his own age did. And this is a factor as to why he started school later than children his age did as well. So generally, he was a year or so older than all of his peers. And as Vincent grew up, he was described as extremely reclusive and kept to himself in a way that kind of made people paranoid and uncomfortable. Most of his time was spent by himself, and there doesn't seem to be any mention of friends or romantic partners in his younger years. But also, something that I found extremely interesting about Vincent is that he actually wet the bed until he was 18. and he was actually prescribed medication to help him stop wetting the bed. Now, just to divert off topic slightly, I found this piece extremely interesting because if you know anything about serial killers and the psychology of psychopathy, it has been pretty well documented that many serial killers wet the bed into their late teens and early 20s. Some researchers have linked this factor to being a result of abuse and how the environment a child grows up in and how a situation like late-stage bedwetting is responded to can be a factor in how violent a person becomes later in life. Now, this is not trying to say that Vincent is some kind of serial killer or that if you are wetting the bed in your late teens or early 20s, that you will become some kind of serial killer. It's just always interesting to me, these random similarities that serial killers share. Again, this is not trying to state this information as any kind of factual statement or as a direct correlation. I just found this part of my research to be particularly interesting, and I wanted to share that with you all. So, despite the fact that Vincent was very reclusive and was struggling in his personal life, by all accounts, he was actually a really good student. And at the age of 18, he goes to college at the Wuhan Institute of Technology, and he works his butt off to be a good student and receive good grades. And after finishing college, he graduated with a degree in computer programming. This led to him leaving Dandong and moving to Beijing in order to find work. And upon his move, he ended up finding a job as a software engineer and maintaining employment in this field for several years. While working as a software engineer in Beijing, he meets a woman by the name of Anna in 1992. And he would later go on to marry Anna 3 years later in 1995. He and Anna quickly settle into their mundane married life, and nothing would really change in the couple's life until 2001. And for reasons that I don't fully know, Vincent and Anna decided that they wanted a fresh start and they wanted to leave China and they wanted to immigrate to Canada, which they were able to do later that year in June. The couple settled into Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada in June of 2001 and became official Canadian citizens in November of 2006. So while this move initially seems like it's going to be a great fit for the couple, in their new life, they quickly run into issues as Vincent cannot find a job as a software engineer. He was pretty much unable to find work in this profession that he had been working on for the last decade and had to settle for working odd jobs that he didn't really enjoy in order to try and make ends meet. This included a job at McDonald's, working at various warehouses, and he also became a custodian for a church at one point.
I have an inkling as to why it was very hard for Vincent to find jobs, but did he ever talk about it or anyone around him ever talk about why?
No, it was not something that came up in my research.
Just knowing some of the struggles that people can have when moving to a new country, especially moving to a Western country from a non-Western country, I could imagine that Vincent had trouble because people didn't want to hire somebody who was a Chinese national, and they likely discriminated against him because of that, even despite all of his qualifications.
I could definitely see that being a factor. However, it was not something that I was able to find much information on. So, though Vincent was having complications on the professional level, by all accounts, the couple was doing well and beginning to settle into their mundane married life in Canada. However, things start to take a left turn in 2004. While Vincent had always been a little bit of an outsider, his behavior starts to become so weird and concerning that his wife is beginning to wonder if he's okay. His eating habits had completely changed. He was barely sleeping, and he was emotionally all over the place and would go from completely fine in one moment to hysterically sobbing in the next. And finally, he confided into his wife that he was hearing voices inside his head. And he also told her that he was seeing visions that came directly from God. So after he tells Anna about this, she is adequately concerned, but she believes that these visions and these voices could be a result of the fact that Vincent wasn't sleeping. So she thought maybe the sleep deprivation was causing him to have these visions and act really out of character. So she takes it upon herself to go to the store and buy Vincent some sleeping medication. And she's kind of thinking that if I can just get him to go to sleep, maybe he will start acting like he used to. However, things do not get better for the couple, and the two were arguing and disagreeing on everything under the sun. And as the couple's problems worsened, Vincent became even more reclusive than he already was. And as he became more reclusive, he also became more irritable and just generally harder to deal with as a person. There are reports of Vincent screaming at random people on the streets, arguing with strangers for no apparent reason, and his struggles to deal with people out of his home became so severe that he barely left his home unless he was going to work. And as you can imagine, this was even more detrimental to his degrading mental health. And he said the voices in his head were getting louder, and he was getting more and more messages from God. A few of these messages included one of the voices in his head telling him that he needed to sell all of his childhood possessions, which he did. Another incident is a voice instructed him that more or less potatoes were the only food that was safe for him to eat. And as a result of this, he only ate potatoes for an extended period of time. And y'all excuse me, my sense of humor might be out of place here, but there's a lot of different ways you can cook up some potatoes. So this diet doesn't actually sound all that crazy to me, because I watched a video this week on 100 different ways to cook potatoes.
I will agree. There's a lot of different ways you can cook potatoes, and I personally love potatoes. Fries, baked potato, scallop potatoes, any kind of hash browns, diced potatoes, any kind of way you can slice and dice and cook a potato, I will eat it.
Period.
However, I am just thinking of all the nutrients he is missing out. Because no fruit, no vegetables, just potatoes.
Just potatoes.
I can't imagine that helped with his ongoing health problems either.
I completely agree. And I don't want to hear y'all judging me about cracking jokes in this case. It's real heavy, and I got to get the jokes in where I can in order to not cry. So, yeah, Vincent is going off the rails, and Anna is just really trying her best to support her husband and try to figure out what to do. And one day, completely out of nowhere, Vincent tells her that he needs some space. He needs to figure out what he wants to do with his life and where he fits into the world. And he packs his bags and moves out of the house.
Oh, the way I would have been sick. I moved across the world for you. And I assume they didn't have really any other family there, right? Like it was just them.
Correct.
I moved across the world for you. I don't know really anybody else here. They probably already don't like us because we're Chinese and we in Canada.
Hello.
And I've been holding it down for you. You've been eating nothing but potatoes. You've been talking about voices. You can't get a good job. I've been holding it down. And you want to leave? Yeah, I'd be sick.
Oh, girl, this just proved to me why I cannot be in my ride or die wife phase ever.
Right.
I used to be one of those girlfriends. I used to be the girlfriend who was going to ride or die for her man. I'm good now.
Right.
I'm good. I ride and die for nobody except maybe Cam.
And as there should be, there is a limit.
Exactly. There is a limit, especially if you're doing stupid stuff.
Exactly. I agree. After a certain point, I'm a need to dip. But it is sad because it seems like a lot of these changes were happening to him over the years, and it's not that he was always like this. So she was probably holding out hope that, this is just a phase. He's gonna turn back into the person he was before. Maybe he needs to get sleep. Maybe he needs some other kind of help. But she probably was thinking it's just a phase and I'm going to get the man that I knew back.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to hear some more about Anna. And it really does seem like she was just really holding out hope that she would get her husband back. So after telling Anna that he just has to get out of the house, Vincent told her that he actually had a new job in Toronto and he would be moving there without her in order to take this time for himself. And Toronto is almost 1,300 miles away from Winnipeg. However, despite Vincent telling Anna that he was going to Toronto, he actually went to this super remote town called Thompson, which is less than 500 miles north of Winnipeg and over 2,000 miles away from Toronto. And if you're wondering how the hell did this man end up in Thompson when he told his wife he was going to Toronto, well, that's because Vincent had another vision. And according to Vincent, God told him that he needed to go buy land in Thompson. I do not know for what purpose. But the biggest problem with this is that Vincent was unemployed and had no money to buy any land in Thompson.
Yeah, and that seems like two pretty big obstacles to this vision that he got from God.
Yep. And for the next 6 months, Vincent stayed in Thompson. I do not have any idea what he was doing while he was staying there. But I am speculating that he was homeless while living there because he has no connection to Thompson, nor is he employed. And I'm sure a lot of us can understand the struggle of dealing with mental illness, but then to also add that extra layer of dealing with homelessness at the same time, I think this is where Vincent's mental health started to rapidly plummet, even more than it already had.
Yeah, I mean, he's around nobody that he knows. He likely doesn't have shelter and the nutrients that he needs to survive. So, yeah, I can see why this didn't make things any better.
Exactly. So after 6 months of being in Thompson, the voice in Vincent's head told him that he actually does need to go to Toronto and he needs to settle down in Toronto.
I would tell this voice, get it straight. You didn't have me living out here for 6 months in this remote town where I don't know nobody. Tell me I had to buy land, and now you want to tell me I got to go 2,000 miles away to Toronto?
Make up your mind, voice.
Exactly.
So he doesn't question it, and he goes to Toronto. But once he gets to Toronto, almost immediately, the voice tells him that he's actually not meant to live in Toronto and that he needs to return to Winnipeg to be with Anna and support his wife. But the voice also tells Vincent that in order for him to return to Winnipeg and see Anna, he would need to walk there. Yes, from Toronto to Winnipeg, which is almost 1,300 miles. And if you wanted to walk from Toronto to Winnipeg, it would take you 402 hours or 17 days, according to Google Maps.
And that's nonstop. That's not counting sleeping.
Exactly.
I'd rather be like, voice, so let me just get this straight. Before I make this trip, are you 100% sure? Because there's been some switch ups in the recent past. So just want to make sure we got everything straight before I embark on this month-long journey.
Right, because remember, Vincent thinks the voice in his head is God, and God is not being very clear about what he is expecting of Vincent.
For real. for a person that created all of humanity, you're not really acting too sure right now. I need you to have a little bit more certainty.
Hello. Again, please do not take our jokes as us minimizing anything that's happening in this case. We just need to lighten the mood as much as possible.
And do.
So, like Vince had been doing for the last couple of years, he listens to the voice in his head and he starts walking back to Winnipeg. And there are actually reports of Vincent walking on the highway heading back to Winnipeg. Now, Vincent doesn't get too far before someone calls the police and reports that there is a man walking on the highway. And when the police arrive, Vincent was described as severely sleep deprived and delusional. According to Vincent, he hadn't eaten or slept in 3 days. So the Canadian police are very concerned and confused, and they asked him, where is he going and is there anybody looking for him? Because they're like, what's going on today, sir? So Vincent tells police that he is, quote, following the sun, end quote. And I have no earthly or heavenly idea what that means.
Did he literally mean I guess the sun's going to be in 2 different directions? I don't know.
Exactly.
Maybe the following the light. In his mind, the sun is God.
Maybe. But even then, like you said, the sun is going to have 2 different directions. You do better following the North Star. If we want to go to the religious side of things, follow the North Star.
Right.
So this answer and quite a few more answers that Vincent gives the police when they are questioning him to try to see if they're okay, the police are finding extremely concerning. So they make the decision to take Vincent to the local hospital and to check him out just to make sure that he's doing okay. And after he is checked by the doctors and psychologists, Vincent is diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was prescribed medication to help him manage and treat his schizophrenia in 2005. Now, I want to give you guys the official definition of schizophrenia, as I feel like a lot of people don't actually know what schizophrenia is. They only know how it is negatively portrayed in the press and in the media. So this definition comes directly from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration and states, quote, schizophrenia is designed as a serious brain disorder that causes people to interpret reality abnormally. They don't know what sights, sounds, and experiences are real or what they are imagining. Schizophrenia usually involves delusions, hallucinations, unusual physical behavior, and disorganized thinking and speech. It is common for people with schizophrenia to have paranoid thoughts or hear voices. For example, they may believe that someone is controlling their mind or going to cause them harm. These psychotic episodes are often frightening, confusing, and isolating, end quote. And I felt it was important to read out an actual definition of schizophrenia because I feel like people have this tendency to believe that people with schizophrenia are inherently violent or they are serial killers or all these negative attributes that we see a lot, especially in the media. I'm a fan of horror movies, and I think if you are also a fan, you definitely understand the trope of killers or masked villains having some level of mental health delusion or defect. But I think it's important to remember the humanity and the person behind the diagnosis, and that a lot of the episodes of people who are schizophrenic come as a result of fear, whether that is external stimuli or the voice inside of their head telling them that they should be afraid. So I wanted to include this portion to make sure you guys know that I in no way, shape, or form think that Vincent's diagnosis of schizophrenia makes him an inherently violent or dangerous person. But this fact is going to be very important as we get into other factors that happen in this case. So I wanted to make sure we are all working with the same knowledge and data going forward.
I think it's really important to state that definition because it can be portrayed in very dramatic ways in movies. And like you said, there are many serial killers who might have this trait, but that does not mean that everyone who has that trait is a serial killer. Do we know if schizophrenia is similar to bipolar disorder in the sense that those symptoms can often begin showing in the early to late 20s of a person's life?
Yes, and it is actually more common for men to start exhibiting symptoms of schizophrenia in their early 20s, as opposed to women. It's actually more consistent that they experience these symptoms in their early 30s. But this seems to be a little bit of a different case, as Vincent is 36 years old when he is diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Yeah, but how long has he been showing those symptoms? Because you said the voices kind of started around, was it 2001? Was that when things started shifting?
Yes. So he was he was 31 when he first started kind of showing these symptoms.
Mm-hmm. That could have been exacerbated. He wasn't able to find a job doing something he truly enjoyed and was having to take these odd jobs on. So I'm sure that all of that together could have exacerbated those symptoms, or the onset of those symptoms.
Absolutely. It actually has been pretty well documented that a lot of mental disorders like schizophrenia and even bipolar disorder to some extent, there is something that triggers something that's already kind of lurking below, if that makes sense. So let's say that somebody has a family history of schizophrenia. That person may not be schizophrenic or show symptoms of schizophrenia until something happens that affects their brain in a negative way that allows these symptoms to come to the surface. That's why I feel like we need to start taking concussions and a lot more head trauma centric injuries a lot more serious, because not only is it bad for the brain long term, but head trauma can unlock things that may not have been unlocked had you never had that head trauma to begin with. So after Vincent was diagnosed with schizophrenia during his hospital visit, like many people who are initially diagnosed with schizophrenia, Vincent was in complete denial of his diagnosis. This is actually very common for people with what society considers to be a very serious mental health issue. And the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration also talks about how denial of one's condition and being ashamed of being labeled with a serious mental illness is one of many reasons that people do not seek treatment for their schizophrenia. And Vincent was in complete denial, not only for his diagnosis, but just how serious his diagnosis was. And because of this denial, Vincent decides that he does not have a mental illness, and as such, he does not need to take the medication that was prescribed to him. And doctors already told him that his condition was manageable and treatable if he would take the medication prescribed to him. And for the next 3 years, Vincent leaves his condition completely untreated. And him and Anna relocate to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And yes, you heard me correctly. Despite everything he had put her through, Anna stays beside Vincent and supports him, even though the two would divorce in 2006. Anna allows Vincent to live in her house rent-free because she is so worried about his mental health and his condition as a whole. And of course, Vincent's condition only gets worse. He continued to act quite reclusively and strangely. He would still occasionally disappear for weeks at a time without telling Anna where he was going or what he was doing. And he spent a great deal of his time talking to himself. And just like we said with Darren, I definitely understand talking to yourself, but there is most definitely a healthy amount of talking to yourself. And Vincent's definitely wasn't healthy. But most importantly, the voice in Vince's head had never gone away over the course of those 3 years. And according to Vincent, the voice in his head, who he called God, was angry with him for not carrying out every order that was given to him. And as a result of him not following all of these orders from the voice in his head, the voice in his head told him that he needed to take his own life for disobeying him. And while Vincent does not listen to the voice in this circumstance, I believe this is the first time we get to see the voice in Vincent's head tell him to do something explicitly violent.
Right, because to this point, it's been more, go to this city, buy land, go to this city, walk to this city. Not anything like, hurt this person or hurt yourself.
Exactly. And despite Vincent ignoring the voice in this regard, his behavior remains extremely erratic as he listens to the voice directing him through his life. In one instance, out of the blue, he tells Anna that he is going back to Beijing to, quote, find a new wife, end quote. And upon that announcement, he left the same day and went back to Beijing. However, after returning to Beijing for a grand total of 1 day, he stated that his mission to find a new wife was unsuccessful, and as his mission was unsuccessful, he needed to return to Canada, which he did the following day. And according to Google Maps, it is a 19-hour flight from Edmonton, Canada to Beijing, China. So he spent approximately 38 hours flying over the course of about 3, maybe 4 days.
I'm sure he spent more time in the plane than he did actually in Beijing trying to find a wife.
Hello.
But honestly, after being on the dating scene for the past few years, I can kind of understand where he's coming from. Sometimes you see what's out there and you're like, I'm good. I'm very good. 1 day is crazy though. 1 day is crazy.
1 day is wild. Upon his return to Canada, his behavior gets even worse, if you can imagine it. This was when his behavior went from erotic and concerning to downright aggressive and violent. He had started a new job at Walmart, and he was actually fired from that job following an altercation that happened with a coworker. He was also very quick to become extremely angry, and at one point, the voice in his head told him that he needed to, quote, protect himself from the evil forces around him, end quote. And this paranoia of everyone in the world being out to get Vincent led him to go and buy a very large hunting knife for his own protection. And the voices never let up in telling him that he was always in danger and that he needed to protect other people from these evil forces. And that certain people were aliens who had been planted there to harm Vincent and others. And I think this constant bombarding of negative thoughts became overwhelming for Vincent, and he decided that he needed to do something about these evil forces around the world. So on July 29th of 2008, Vincent left the home he shared with Anna and left her a note that said, quote, I'm gone. Don't look for me. I wish you were happy, end quote. He then went and bought himself a Greyhound bus ticket at the local bus station. He buys a ticket for the 1170 Greyhound bus to Winnipeg. And very interestingly, Vincent actually gives a fake name when he buys his bus ticket. And the name he gives is Wong Pitt. This piece of information is not important. It does not have any impact or bearing on this case, but I did find it interesting, and I do wonder why he did that.
That is interesting, and I definitely want to hear part 2 because I'm not sure what exactly he does, but potentially he knew he was going to do something bad and he was trying to hide his identity. I'm not sure.
That's what it feels like to me. So Vincent boards the 1170 Greyhound bus from Edmonton to Winnipeg on July 29th of 2008, just 24 hours before Timothy would be taking the same bus route. However, roughly 18 hours into the bus ride from Edmonton to Winnipeg, Vincent begins to hear voices in his head telling him that he is in danger and he needs to get off of the bus. And as soon as the bus approaches its next stop, which is in Erickson, Canada, Vincent gets off the bus and does not get back on the bus when it is scheduled to leave and continue to Winnipeg. It doesn't seem like Vincent really does anything when he gets off of the bus, other than realize that he needs to get back on a different bus because he needs to get to Winnipeg. So Vince then decides that he needs to get on another 1170 Greyhound bus in order to complete his destination and actually go to Winnipeg. The only problem is that another Greyhound bus would not be arriving to the bus stop for another 24 hours. And so Vincent decides that he needs to wait at that bus stop for 24 hours for the next available 1170 Greyhound bus. And by wait at that bus stop, I mean Vincent sat on a bench and basically didn't move for the next 24 hours. He did not sleep while waiting for this bus stop. And when the morning finally rolled around, the voices in his head were telling him that he needed to sell all of his possessions he currently had. This includes a few bags of clothes, as well as a laptop. And he actually ends up selling the laptop to a 15-year-old boy for $60. Mind you, this is a brand new laptop, and the rest of his belongings that he was unable to sell, he starts setting them on fire on the side of the road. And no one said anything about this random person setting their belongings on fire on the side of the road because people were scared of him. He was also still displaying very aggressive and erratic behavior, and people from the bus station actually said they were scared of him because of how he was acting in the bus station, and they made a great effort to avoid him. After waiting 24 hours, another 1170 Greyhound bus pulls into the Erickson bus stop at approximately 6 p.m. And Vincent gets on the bus, joining the already 36 passengers who had been traveling along this route for approximately 18 hours. And he sits in the front row of the bus. After an additional hour of travel, the bus makes another stop to allow passengers to stretch, use the restroom, and generally take a break from the long bus ride. And most of, if not all, the passengers get off of the bus, take their break, and then get back on the bus to continue their journey in the same seats they were sitting in prior to getting off of the bus. However, Vincent walks to the back of the bus, looking at every single passenger as he walks by, passing several empty seats as he's walking down the aisle, and takes a seat next to 22-year-old Timothy Richard McLean. He is greeted and asked how he's doing before Timothy puts his headphones back on and goes to sleep. And if you would like to know what happens after Vincent takes a seat, you'll have to wait until part 2.
Wow. I mean, y'all gonna have to wait 2 weeks. If you're a subscriber, you're gonna have to wait 1 week. I only gotta wait about 10 minutes before we start recording part 2 again. But that was a roller coaster. I mean, like you said, I definitely feel like I have a good understanding of both Timothy and Vincent going into this. I don't know what's about to happen, but I mean, I can already tell it's unfortunate Because Timothy seems like such a positive, happy, adventurous person, and Vincent is unfortunately struggling with many mental health issues that are causing him to be violent and aggressive. And so, yeah, I really do wonder where this is about to go.
It's about to get crazy, friend. It's about to get crazy. And I wanted to spend a full episode explaining the background of this case because I wanted you guys to get a sense of how everything in the universe really had to align for this scenario to take place, because they weren't originally scheduled to be on the same bus. Timothy was offered a plane ticket as opposed to a bus ticket. It's just everything had to go wrong in order for us to get where we are with these two sitting next to each other on this bus. And that is just so sadly fascinating to me.
I agree. Total chance encounter.
Exactly. Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I'd also like to thank Danielle Kirsty and Law and Crime for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram and TikTok.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you are listening on Spotify, feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends, and see y'all in part 2. Bye.
Bye.